Hey there, and welcome friends. The climax is the most important section of any story. It's the moment your readers have been waiting for, the moment when every question is answered and every conflict reaches its ultimate and explosive end. The promise of a dramatic and exciting climax can be why people pick up a book in the first place, and it can also be one of the most challenging parts of a book to write. At some point, as a writer, you'll be forced to grapple with the complicated machinery of the climax. You want to make sure it doesn't become overwhelming. But how exactly do you make the climax of your story work? Well, today we'll be answering that question. We'll be discussing the process of outlining your story, the 5-part structure of any climax, and creating meaning through internal conflict. So let's jump straight in. What is a climax? You might be thinking, this seems pretty obvious. The climax is the moment when everything comes together in the final act. The hero fights a villain in a spectacular brawl and barely makes it out alive. They can finally reach that all-important happy ending, right? Yes, but that's only scratching the surface of what a great climax does for your story. Your character should undergo a significant change, and this is what readers usually take away from the story. Despite what most writers assume, the big battle scene or dramatic duel isn't the most exciting part of the climax. The essential element of any climax is actually the internal conflict that takes place. The character has to face themselves and what they believe about the world and decide to change. And we'll explore this in greater detail later, but for now, let's look at the benefits of outlining your climax. Most writers will work from an outline when writing their story. The outline is a roadmap for you to follow when plotting your novel, and it's up to you how much detail you include. Every writer varies in how much flexibility they want when writing. A strong outline is an extensive plan that connects plot details, characters, settings, and scenes. It can be as detailed as you need it to be. And the benefits of outlining before writing are vast. It can provide order to the events of the story. How often have you sat down to write and then quickly became overwhelmed, frustrated at all the different plot details that you're juggling around in your head? It's happened to me many times over, and it's hard. It's important to know that you're not alone. Most writers struggle to balance the events of their stories. Outlining broader plot points will help make it clear exactly what's going on at each moment. This is especially helpful when writing stories with many storylines. A good outline can also allow you to take a step back and see the journey that your character has gone through. And by the time you reach the climax, you'll have a stronger grasp of how your character will grow and how they'll change. The process of outlining can also be crucial in avoiding the dreaded writer's block. We all know the feeling of being in a creative jam, and knowing the structure of your story before you write it will make it much easier for your writing process to flow in a much more streamlined way. And the climax answers the questions that arise throughout the plot. The climax is a dramatic conflict. It's a moment readers have been waiting for and what they'll likely remember the most from your novel. And as a writer, your job is to make the climax gripping and deliver on promises made throughout the story. So will your hero defeat their adversary? What is the biggest obstacle in their way? And how will they find the strength to overcome such an adversary? These are the questions your reader will want answers to. And hopefully, now you understand the importance of outlining a climax. However, you may still be wondering how to structure one. As mentioned earlier, the climax is the ultimate form of dramatic conflict, and it makes up the third act of a story. This section of any story aims to answer plot questions posed by the writer from the very start. For example, a typical plot question in the crime thriller genre is, who is the killer, and will our hero bring them to justice? By the final act, the reader expects answers to these questions. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder is a classic book on story structure that we'll be looking at. Snyder breaks down the climax into 5 significant parts. Let's go ahead and take a look at how each part works in unison to create a meaningful climax. The first part is called the team up. This is the run-up to the final conflict. At this stage, the protagonist must prepare for what they're about to face. Often this can involve recruiting the help of characters introduced throughout the story. And these secondary characters might also focus on any B or C plots alongside the main A plot. It's also important to note that the side plots of your novel will also need to be resolved at this stage. Your character might not have any allies for the final confrontation, and they could still take this moment to reconcile any broken relationships. It's common for a character to apologize to people they've hurt before facing the final battle. And the second stage of any climax is the plan. Now the protagonist has recruited a team and they are ready to commit to their plan. And the plan is often hidden from the reader for increased tension and only revealed when put into action. Things still seem positive for the characters. Their plan works and they look set to win. But this is the moment when writers will introduce a problem. Something goes wrong, an antagonist outsmarts them at the last moment. A new obstacle now faces the protagonist, and it seems they might be trapped for that moment. And then we have stage 3, the surprise. This is a reaction by the character to what has happened. Up until now, everything was going to plan, but an unexpected obstacle appeared, and this is where the tension begins to build. The protagonist didn't see this moment. Any hope of escape seemed to be gone. The surprise is one of the most gripping moments of the entire story, so make sure it pays off. And keep in mind that none of these stages of the climax needs to be action heavy. The go-to example of a climax is a final battle that will test the protagonist's limits. The climax needs to be your main character's toughest challenge yet, but it doesn't have to be physical to have meaning. For example, in romantic dramas, the climax is usually a declaration of love, or a reunion of two ex-lovers. Stage 4 is a moment of realization for the protagonist. The characters now understand what they need to do to overcome this obstacle. This is sometimes called the light bulb moment. It's a moment when everything clicks for the protagonist. The critical thing to remember is that your main character will have to face their internal conflict. And we'll explore this in more detail later. For now, keep in mind that the character has to undergo some kind of change in order to defeat their final adversary. And the fifth and final stage of the climax is the execution of the new plan. The characters have faced their misbeliefs about the world and experienced meaningful change. Now they can use this to help them overcome their final obstacle. You might be wondering how to shape a climax in which your character doesn't win the final battle. There are many examples of a character losing their final confrontation. One of the most obvious examples is Rocky. Rocky Balboa loses his fight in the first movie. This doesn't lessen the meaning of the story because he still achieves a personal victory. This is the key to creating a meaningful climax that many writers fail to understand. The climactic conflict isn't all about an external conflict. There also needs to be an internal conflict that the character has to face first. But what is internal conflict and how is it different from external conflict? This is the force that drives the climax. Consider the following questions. What does the conflict mean to your character? What do they need to change about themselves or their beliefs to progress? The internal conflict arises when a character has a false belief. This means they believe something about the world that will be challenged in the climax. The effect of this forces them to change. We see this all the time when characters start a story with a specific worldview, and it usually keeps them in the same place for a long time. The story's meaning is to place a character in a situation where they must change these beliefs. So to recap the story structure for the climax, your character prepares for a final conflict. They execute a plan, and out of the blue something goes wrong, and everything seems hopeless again until the character realizes they have to change to be victorious. They then take new and drastic action. Remember, the key ingredient here to any meaningful climax is internal conflict. The protagonist must change throughout the story. Otherwise, the reader will question why they picked up the book in the first place. This change is magnified in those final moments of dramatic conflict during the climax. And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and you feel inspired to write a decisive climatic moment that will make your story stand out. And comment below your story ideas and what you find the most challenging about writing a great climax. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Again, my name is Josh. I'm the founder of Squibbler, and I'll see you in some of our following videos. Cheers.